Hollow Earth, the domain of UFOs, Nazis, and dinosaurs. An idea that appears in a variety of conspiracy theories and a legion of movies, comic books, and novels. Where did this idea even come from? And why does it keep reappearing? Today we're looking at what might be the biggest lost mythical land out there, the Hollow Earth. But first, hello, my name is Garvin and I read things and blather on about them on the internet for your entertainment. With that out of the way, let's turn to the Hollow Earth. The idea of a hollow Earth, or at least a subterranean inner world, is one that emerges in many cultures. In some places, the Hollow Earth is a supernatural place that may hold the afterlife. For example, Hades for the Greeks. Another example in Dante's Inferno, the Christian hell is inside the earth. In other places, like India, the supernatural Nagas lived in a vast subterranean realm, and the kingdom of Argatha was inside the earth. There are Buddhist traditions of the city of Shambhala also laying beneath the ground. Among Native American nations like the Hopi and the Lakota, there are stories of humanity emerging from an underground world or an underground lodge to a freshly created world that they proceed to inhabit. There are a wide variety of legends about underground places and worlds, so maybe it's not a surprise that the idea has persisted to the modern day. Now, this does tend to take two forms. The full hollow Earth, where the world is completely hollow with a vast inner space, usually with its own light source to provide the fuel for life. And the second form I like to refer to as the inner Earth, where you don't have a fully hollow world, but you have this worldwide cave system connected by caverns and vast tunnels. The modern-day conception of Hollow Earth gets its start in the 1600s, however. The earliest suggestion of Hollow Earth as an idea in any sort of scientific contest I can find comes from Alphanius Ketcher, a Jesuit scholar who had written over 40 works of comparative religion, medicine, and geology. One of those works was the Mundus Subterraneus, a geology text that suggested there may be a series of tunnels, caves, and caverns filled with water connecting the South and North Pole. Now, what's interesting here is Ketcher was actually trying to be scientific. He was an advocate of rationalism, which was the idea of using logic and observation to figure out the physical laws of the world and use those to explain events without resorting to just declaring miracles. This guy was one of the first people arguing that maybe we shouldn't just say God has an answer to anything vaguely mysterious. It's in 1692 that what we would recognize as the modern idea of Hollow Earth first gets written down by Edmund Halley. This is the guy they named Halley's Comet after. He's also the guy who created the first catalog of stars that could be seen from the southern hemisphere, and he came up with a way to figure out the distance between Earth, Venus, and the Sun. Not a small name in physics. At the time, he was struggling to figure out why compass readings were sometimes off from north. And he came up with the idea that the Earth was hollow, with 3 hollow spheres each nestled inside of each other inside the Earth. Each of these spheres had their own pole, and they all rotated in different speeds and possibly different directions. And depending on the rotation and position of that pole underground, it might affect your compass reading, was his idea. I'm not sure this idea was ever widely accepted, but it doesn't appear to have been considered ridiculous either. Everyone, though, did agree it was impossible to prove because, under Halley's model at least, there's no way to actually get down deep enough in the Earth to find these interior spheres. At least not with the technology he had in 1692. The next part of the model was added in 1818, and the gentleman who came up with that was Captain John Cleves Sims, Jr., a U.S. Army officer, trader, and lecturer, and he came up with the idea that not only is the Earth hollow, with the outer shell that we live on being about 1,300 kilometers or 810 miles in eagle measurements thick, but it had two openings at the poles. Each opening was about 2,300 kilometers or 1,400 miles across, leading to four inner spheres, each with their own openings at their respective poles. Which, I guess this makes the Earth a tube in this model, or maybe he thought that last sphere in the middle didn't have any openings. I'm not entirely sure on how this is supposed to work. That said, Captain Sims was willing to put his money where his mouth was, and he pushed for an expedition. Of course, lacking enough funds to do this by himself, he needed other people to pay in, and very few people were willing to fork over enough money to trek to the North Pole to try and find a gigantic opening that no one had ever thought possible before. That said, he did have supporters like J.N. Reynolds, an American newspaper editor, lecturer, and explorer who widely supported his idea and often argued that the U.S. government should fund an expedition to the North Pole to prove this. Captain Sims often spoke about his idea and wrote about it, but he never wrote a full book about his theories. Others did, though, including his son. There were also other writers like Sir John Leslie, a Scottish mathematician who published ideas about a hollow Earth in his books, Elements of Natural Philosophy, the 1829 edition. It's around this point, although I haven't nailed down exactly when and by who, the 10 lost tribes of Israel get pulled into this story, with people claiming that the 10 lost tribes of Israel had been led to the Hollow Earth, or in some cases abducted into the Hollow Earth, depending on who's telling the story and why. And it occurs to me that I should explain who or what the 10 lost tribes of Israel are, so let me do that real brief, but this is going to be the down and dirty version. I'm skipping a lot of details. You had Abraham, who had Isaac, who had Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons. Each tribe of Israel traces their descent to one of those sons. After King David's death, the Israelites split into two kingdoms, Judea in the south and what's usually called Israel in the north, just to simplify. The tradition is that the kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians, and as part of their standard conquest program, what they would do is forcibly relocate newly conquered subjects to the far corners of their empire, breaking them apart, to shatter their cultural and social cohesion and make rebellion harder to pull off against them. Although, considering the Assyrian Empire fell, harder was not impossible. The ultimate fate, though, of the 10 tribes is the focus of a lot of myth and folklore, although, for the sake of completion, I should mention there are also scholars who argue that there were never 12 tribes to begin with. I'm not going to dive into that debate, though. I'm going to save that for the possibility of me doing a video focused completely on the 10 lost tribes, because they do come up in Prester John, and they'll likely come up again. However, by the time you hit the 1900s, Hollow Earth is no longer considered a valid scientific theory. And to be fair, there were experiments conducted as early as the late 1700s showing that the observed gravity and density of the Earth did not match with anything you would expect from a hollow Earth. And as time went on and technology improved, we got better observations and conducted better experiments, and it became increasingly clear with the data we were getting that nothing matched up to what you would expect from a hollow Earth. The Earth was increasingly clearly filled with something. Probably rock was the most common guess. And I think that was a good guess. But, getting back to it, the idea of a hollow Earth didn't go away, though, and various writers began increasingly using it for a variety of fiction stories. Now, Hollow Earth had shown up in fiction before the start of the 20th century. Jules Verne's story, Journey to the Center of the Earth, was published in 1864, to use the most famous example. But the 20th century is where Hollow Earth fiction really starts to take off. To give some examples, you have the feminist utopia novel Nequita, or the more pronounceable title, The Problem of the Ages, and that story was first published in a serialized form in a newspaper based out of Topeka, Kansas, which I did not see coming for a feminist novel. A German noblewoman named Walburgia Lady Pageant claimed in her books, Colloquies with an Unseen Friend, that there were underground nations, and that's where the people of Atlantis had fled. And wow, I really just can't escape Atlantis. I just can't. Getting back to the topic, you also had The Smoky God, published in 1908, and you had numerous stories claiming to be a record of real events, detailing contact with subterranean worlds, often linking them with other stories and belief. For example, you had Michael Grumley, an American zoologist, who linked Hollow Earth to Bigfoot, suggesting that no one could find Bigfoot because he was using an ancient, vast tunnel system to evade detection, which it's not the worst idea I've heard, honestly, when it comes to Bigfoot. And we also have the Shaver Mysteries, which I talked about earlier. They're linked to Hollow Earth with the idea that ancient humanity created all of their cities underground to avoid their most dangerous enemy, the sun. Another story that touches on Hollow Earth is actually one of my favorite Lovecraft stories, The Mound, but my favorite books featuring the Hollow Earth remain Edgar Rice Burroughs' Pellucidar series, which is a great, fun read if you ask me. The use of Hollow Earth as an idea in fiction has continued into the 21st century, most significantly in movies, through Legendary's Pictures' Godzilla's movies, the Monsterverse. But throughout the 20th and 21st century, the idea also showed up in comic books, both in Marvel comic books, although they preferred the inner Earth idea with vast subterranean realms. DC Comics had a title called The Warlord, which just flat out took place in a Hollow Earth setting. There are also stories in the Hellboy universe which feature a Hollow World. Dungeons & Dragons is influenced by the Hollow World as well. You can see this in the Underdark, which is another inner Earth subterranean realm. You can go in there and adventure and probably get murdered by drought. And in what might be the first complete D&D setting, Mystara, there's a full-blown Hollow Earth. And I should note that Mystara is not supported by Hasbro at the moment, but is kept alive by constant fan works. And if you want to know more about it, I would suggest checking out Mr. Welch's YouTube channel. He has a video specifically about Mystara's Hollow Earth setting, and he has a bunch of videos about the broader Mystara setting in general, and they're fun to watch. If you go down there, just leave a note in the comments I sent you, alright? Getting away from fiction for a moment, though, despite all the evidence against Hollow Earth actually existing, there are still people who believe in it, and they work to find evidence to prove it, even in the 21st century. For example, we had Steve Curry, a Utah River guide and a believer, who was trying to gather support and funds to chart a nuclear-powered Russian icebreaker and lead an expedition to the North Pole and prove there was an opening there. His plan was to bring about 100 people who would each pay about $20,000 for the trip. He, however, passed away from brain cancer, and while an engineer named Brooks Agnew has taken up the cause, there's been no expedition, at least not as of 2025 when I'm making this video. Gotta be honest though, I'm pretty sure they're not going to find any massive openings into the interior of the Earth at the North or the South Pole. As things stand, there is simply no physical or anything I would call definitive evidence that the Earth is hollow, but there's plenty of evidence for the current model of a crust, a mantle, and a core. That said, I can at least respect people who are willing to go there and check it out for themselves, as long as they bring professionals with them and prepare for a serious trip into the Arctic. It's a dangerous place, and you should not go there unless you are prepared, folks. I do also want to go over a variation of the Hollow Earth idea here, and that is the Conclave Earth. This was first advanced by Cyrus Reed Teed in 1869. Teed was an American, and after a botched experiment with electricity that knocked him out, he woke up convinced he had had a vision. He declared himself the new Messiah and went out and founded a new religion. He also declared that the Earth was hollow and that we were on the inside of it. How this works with satellites and us landing on the moon, I don't know. But, to be completely fair to Teed, he died in 1908, and his religion went in decline after that, and disappeared entirely by 1961, so it's not really ever a question he was confronted with. Although, quick fun fact, Teed was a distant relative of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church. I don't think that's relevant, I just thought it was funny. When I think about it, the Hollow Earth is a story that just keeps reappearing no matter what science does to disprove it, and I think it's because it speaks to something deep inside of us. An inheritance from when our ancestors held rites in caves and painted the walls of those dark depths with art. The part of us that looks into caves and chasms and imagines monsters looking back. The part of us that hopes that there is life besides us out there and really hopes it's closer than those distant stars. Hollow Earth is an excuse to let your imagination run wild with history and myth, and let's be honest, don't we all enjoy that just a little bit? It's on that note that I'm going to end this week's video. There's a lot more to this topic, and we will be revisiting it someday, dependent on the patron votes. But I hope you found it informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing, as all of that helps me in my eternal battle with the Dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like to have a voice on future videos, consider joining my Everwise patrons who are voting on future videos right now. Speaking of patrons, I'd also like to thank my biggest supporter, Big Steve. I hope you never fall into a hole and wake up in the Hollow Earth, Big Steve. Next week, we are going to look at the mythical island of High Brazil, which may actually have nothing to do with the real country. I hope you'll join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.